This video is a patron request. If you'd like to make a video request of your own, you can do so by becoming a Tier 5 patron. The link to this can be found below. Greetings, denizens of the Empire. It's Jabara here. The Mongols. One of history's most devastating warrior cultures to ever exist, conquering a stretch of contiguous land larger than any empire before or after. Very few armies could muster the strength, scale, or even technological prowess to defeat this brutal force of nomadic horse-riding bowmen. From China all the way to Eastern Europe, the Mongol Empire was an all-but unstoppable force, and in addition to their warrior spirit, they brought with them numerous world-changing innovations, including gunpowder, a Chinese invention that changed the course of world history. One notable change that they brought in the wake of their plunder was the bubonic plague, which was responsible for killing off roughly a third of Europe's population. However, there are some regions that did successfully defend themselves against this seemingly invincible force, notably the Japanese, the Delhi Sultanate, the Kingdom of Hungary, and the Mamluk Sultanate. However, what if the latter was defeated and the Mongols took a southern route into Africa? How would the kingdoms of Africa fare against a Mongol invasion? How would their armies, weapons, and strategies stack up against those of the largest contiguous empire in human history? And just how far would the Mongols actually make it into Africa if they did invade? And what influence will the Mongols have within the continent of Africa? Well, let's find out. So firstly, disclaimer, this is purely an alternate history scenario and everything covered in it is simply a combination of some historical facts about the respective peoples that I'll be discussing and alternative scenarios that I've formulated mixed in with them, followed by my own personal opinions on how these interactions would have taken place, and you're more than welcome to share your own personal opinions as well. Also, if it's very evident that you simply replied to the title of the video with an ignorant statement regarding African people or their history, then it is quite obvious that you did not even watch the video and likely never even made it far enough into the video to hear this part at all. With that being said, nobody cares.
Wait, were you talking about me? Man, fuck you. We all know that them Africans would have ran from their primitive mud huts with sticks and stones and got steamrolled by superior Eurasian armies.
Hell yeah, he was talking about you, cause he know that the truth of the matter is that Genghis Khan and his Mongol army was black melanated people, and they didn't want to conquer their black brothers in Africa.
Historically, Egypt has served as a crossroads of peoples since prehistoric times, well up into the Middle Ages. The fertile Nile Valley presented an attractive location for peoples of various regions to converge in an otherwise brutally arid desert. However, this region has not only been attractive to peaceful nomads, farmers, and merchants. Conquerors have even gazed hungrily at this region for millennia, notably the Greeks, Romans, Kushites, Assyrians, Arabs, Ottomans, and later the British. The Mongols were no different. With their sights set on world conquest, Egypt was next on their list after the Near East. However, during the time of the Mongol invasions, Egypt was ruled by the Mamluk Sultanate, a powerful dynasty composed of several peoples including Turks and Arabs, and against all odds, this dynasty managed to defeat the Mongol army, effectively preventing them from entering Africa. But what if they didn't? What if they were conquered by the Mongol horde, like much of the rest of Eurasia? In this scenario, we will just say that like much of the rest of the Eurasian continent, the Mamluk Sultanate suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of the Mongols, and this unstoppable military power continued down the Nile Valley, conquering Egypt, making its way into the lands of Nubia. So during my research, I often get hung up on things. Between different emails, websites for my background music, stock videos, and sources for my research, a never-ending issue that I have is being able to seamlessly log into everything with ease, all the while avoiding that dreaded remember your password link that nobody wants to click. That's why I partnered with NordPass. NordPass is a password manager created by the makers of NordVPN. While NordPass does indeed remember my passwords, I still feel safe and confident due to their highly advanced software which stores all of my information into an encrypted bank that uses zero-knowledge password management. What this means is that it's so secure that not even the NordPass team members have access to it. Additionally, I can create a brand new password more complex than anything I'd ever make for myself with just the click of a button. Then, I can enter this password into the respective website with another click of a button, which will autofill it into the login section without having to worry about forgetting. However, anytime I want a more simple password that I can easily remember, NordPass has a built-in tool that notifies me of password health, letting me know how strong or weak it is based on how old it is, or if I've used it on multiple accounts. NordPass works on mobile devices and most internet browsers, so I can continue my work and research seamlessly across all of my devices, up to 6 devices actually. This saves me massive amount of time and headache remembering my info while also not compromising my security. If you click my affiliate link down below, you can instantly receive my exclusive From Nothing discount. So, it's easy to assume that the Mongols would have made quick work of the underdog Nubian kingdoms, usually overshadowed by Egypt in any and all historical discussions. Additionally, the lands south of the Sahara collectively tend to be labeled as primarily tribal in nature, consisting of little more than sparsely populated villages, of agrarian farmers, or of nomadic pastoralist peoples. However, this is far from the truth. And Nubians specifically throughout history have had a strong tradition of skilled archers and cavalry, which to many would-be invaders have proved to be a difficult and challenging opponent. Not only did the Nubian kingdom of Kush conquer Egypt itself in the 8th century BCE, but throughout much of the following centuries, Nubian kingdoms resisted invasions from several foreign powers, including the Assyrians, the Romans, and the Arabs, all the while their Egyptian neighbors to the north fell to these very same powers. So factoring in Nubia's strong resistance to foreign invasion, as well as a similar tradition of skilled archers and cavalry practiced by the Mongols, I think it's safe to say that the Mongols would definitely have their work cut out for them. At the same time that the Mongols would have reached this region collectively known as Nubia, it would have been occupied by various Christian states, including the powerful kingdom of Makuria, the same state that held off not one, but 2 full-scale invasions by the powerful Rashidun Caliphate, backed by the recently conquered Egyptian army. To date, these battles are known as the First and Second Battles of Dongola, respectively. These victories also came in spite of being heavily outnumbered in both battles. The Nubian people have historically held a reputation of being highly skilled warriors, notably in the use of the bow and arrow, and were described by Arab sources to have been so accurate with their shots that they'd even shoot out the eyes of innumerable amounts of warriors in both of these aforementioned battles. In fact, the ancient Egyptians referred to their lands as Taseti, quite literally meaning land of the bow. The difficulty in subjugating Nubia was also demonstrated when the Roman Empire withdrew its interest from the region after numerous confrontations with the Kushite Empire. So with these long-standing traditions of effectively holding off invasions, how would the Nubian kingdoms have fared against the Mongol Empire? One important thing to note is that the Mongols are often credited as possibly being the ones to spread gunpowder to Europe and the Middle East, as well as many other lands that they conquered. With that being said, the power of the kingdom of Makuria rested heavily on archers, oftentimes defending from atop the city walls or ramparts, as was the case in the Battle of Dongola. The Mongols would have most likely used cannons and grenades to devastating effect against the Makurian army, and not only in destroying the city walls themselves, but also as psychological warfare. As with most armies that the Mongols faced, the loud and thunderous boom of the gunpowder explosions as well as the concussive power and lethality that they produced may have driven many of the Makurian army into panic. While it is impossible to say for sure if panic would have occurred, I can say with a fair amount of confidence that gunpowder would have been the only major advantage that the Mongols would have had over the Makurians. According to Arab sources, the Nubians were unfamiliar with even more primitive siege machines like catapults, but persevered against Islamic forces nonetheless. Additionally, I'd like to emphasize again that much of the power of the Mongol army came from its swift forces of horse-riding archers. Most armies of the world at the time relied primarily on infantry or foot soldiers carrying melee weapons such as spears and swords. Additionally, the bulk of these armies were relatively poorly trained and often composed of common folk rather than professionally trained warriors. Makuria, on the other hand, like the Mongols, had a similar tradition of highly trained archers as well as cavalry, which comprised the bulk of their army. Historically, the Makurians and Mongols both utilized this to great effect against their neighbors, and so this clash would have been a lot less one-sided than previous conquests of the Mongols. It is impossible to say for certain who would have won in this epic confrontation between the world's best archers, but one thing's for certain, conquering the kingdoms of Nubia would have been no easy task for Mongols, and additionally, the Makurian army would have had the defensive home field advantage on top of the aforementioned formidable cavalry and archery traditions. So with an obvious little bit of bias but mostly just logic, I would have to say that the Mongol expansion would have likely halted at the borders of Makuria. However, this is not to say that would have been a completely one-sided, decisive defeat of the Mongols at the hands of the Makurians, but I do feel fairly confident in saying that the Mongols would have either been unable to defeat the Makurians or unwilling to continue their campaign, as it would not be feasible or logical to continue military expansion into Makurian lands without immeasurable loss of life among the ranks of the Mongols. So if the Mongols did manage to pull off a decisive victory against the Nubians, or come up with some outstanding strategy to outwit their first ever black African foes, it still wouldn't be smooth sailing by any means. However, for the sake of keeping this scenario open, we'll just say that the Mongols hypothetically did end up conquering Nubia. After this hypothetical conquest of the Nile Valley, the Mongols would then have two choices: journey westward across the largest hot desert in the world, all the while keeping an army alive for several months, or just continue on down the Nile Valley. While the second choice would be the most logical and likely, this would put them into direct conflict with the Ethiopian kingdoms. In our real timeline, as with the Nubian kingdoms of Makuria, Nobatia, and Alodia, Ethiopia was also Christian, and arguably even more powerful. In fact, it is likely that the Ethiopians were the ones who converted the Nubians to Christianity in the first place. Nubia was once controlled by the aforementioned Kushite Empire, the same empire that conquered Egypt. The Aksumite Empire, a contemporary Ethiopian state, actually conquered the Kushite Empire. Not even the Romans or the Arabs succeeded in their attempts. The Aksumites converted to Christianity in the 4th century, one of the earliest states in the world to do so, and then they conquered the Kushite Empire shortly after. Kush then subsequently fractured into several Christian kingdoms, one of which was able to defeat 2 full-scale Arab invasions, as we mentioned earlier. Ethiopia was also the only country in Africa that fended off a full-scale European invasion and retained its independence during the scramble for Africa. With that being said, the lands of Ethiopia had a rich history of powerful and competent military traditions that made them more than capable of facing off against large and powerful foreign invaders, including ones with strong archery and cavalry traditions. Additionally, Ethiopia exists in a rugged and mountainous region, and places like these have historically been a difficult obstacle for most foreign invaders. This includes Ethiopia itself, the US invasion of Afghanistan, the Persian invasion of Greece, and so on. Mountainous or hilly regions have seldom been easy lands to conquer, especially for troops who rely primarily on horse-mounted warriors. However, if the Mongols did manage to defeat the Nubians and reach Ethiopia in a period which we'll put at around 1290, they would have had one advantage. During this time in history, Ethiopia was largely disunified, consisting of numerous kingdoms, as the Solomonic dynasty was in a long process of consolidating the many Ethiopian states into its realms. While they were experienced and competent warriors who consistently fended off against Islamic armies, as well as their aforementioned experience against the Nubians, who, like the Mongols, were also competent archers, these warring states would have had a numerical disadvantage individually, and would need to be able to quickly agree to a unified front against their Mongol foes, in order to have a sufficient number of troops. Otherwise, their chances of success would rely entirely on the utilization of their mountainous terrain to render Mongol cavalry useless, and to organize guerrilla warfare to compensate for their numerical disadvantages. So in my humble opinion, the likelihood that the Mongols would have even made it down the entire Nile Valley is incredibly low, but not impossible. However, if they did, it would have likely been a lengthy campaign, and for the sake of this scenario, we'll just put it at a length of 15 years. So by 1305, they'll have finally acquired the ability to extend their campaign to the west, after bypassing the brutal desert through the fertile Nile Valley. At this point, their westward trek across the Sahelian region would be a relatively seamless process. The Sahel consists of arid seasonal grasslands not unlike the Central Asian steppes that are the original homeland of the Mongols, the only difference being that the Sahel are hot steppes rather than cold ones. Throughout this trek, they might get hung up at the powerful Kanem Empire, one of Sub-Saharan Africa's oldest and largest states, located roughly midway through the continent. While it's been incredibly difficult to find any information regarding the military history of the Kanem Empire during this period of time, what we do know is that its original founders, known as the Kanuri, were similar to the Mongols, as they were also horse-riding nomads, and they too formed a massive state through conquest of sedentary people, the Sao. The Sao people were already established in the region around Lake Chad, organized into a collection of walled city-states when the Kanuri arrived, but nevertheless, these nomadic horsemen were able to effectively conquer the lands of the Sao and establish their own rulers and effectively settle into these sedentary communities themselves, adopting much of the customs and ways of life of the people that they conquered. With that being said, the Kanem Empire would basically be fighting their old selves if a Mongol horde were to arrive at their city gates, as they would be familiar with the siege tactics of these horse-riding nomads, not unlike themselves. This situation would continue throughout the remainder of the West African Sahel and Savannah regions, as many states in the region were teeming with powerful kingdoms, all possessing strong traditions of cavalry like the Mosi. Additionally, they'd likely run into conflicts with other horse-riding nomads including the Tuareg and the Fulani. If the Mongol horde did somehow find its way farther west, they'd encounter the powerful Mali Empire, which would have been in its golden age at this time, boasting one of the largest empires in the entire world, only behind the Delhi Sultanate, located in what is now India, and the Empire of the Mongols themselves, and capable of deploying an army of over 100,000 warriors, 10,000 of which were cavalry. Additionally, the unfamiliar climate and the tropical diseases could prove detrimental to Mongol forces, a theme that would persist in any future campaigns anywhere farther to the south at this point, and farther to the west towards the Atlantic Ocean. The forested regions would prove an all but impossible barrier, as this region is teeming with mosquito-infested waterways, which even today are still rife with malaria, a disease that Mongols would have lacked any natural resistance to, unlike their potential African victims. Even worse still, this region of Africa would also introduce the final nail in the coffin for any further Mongol advances: the tsetse fly. I've mentioned this insect numerous times before throughout my content, rightfully so, as it was repeatedly a detrimental obstacle to any horses that entered the region, as they are vectors for the sleeping sickness, an illness that is virtually always lethal to horses and causes extreme illness or death in humans as well. The sleeping sickness, single-handedly why horses never extended any farther south than the Sudanic grasslands of Africa, and with that being said, any and all Mongol ambitions to extend into the interior of Africa would be quickly put to a halt, as malaria, the sleeping sickness, and other tropical diseases would stop both the horses and the Mongols themselves right in their tracks, reducing them to nothing more than dead or dying hordes of foot soldiers from distant lands. This is a theme that has been seen even in our real timeline among early European explorers who were held back from the interior regions of Sub-Saharan Africa for centuries, due in part to the endemic tropical diseases in which they had no resistance, a theme so common among Europeans, the region of West Africa collectively earned the nickname the White Man's Grave, until medical innovations of the 19th century allowed European visitors to counteract these obstacles. This region basically produced the polar opposite experience to what was the case when Europeans introduced their own diseases to Native Americans. I cover this in more detail in my most recent video. I'll leave a link to it at the end screen. So that's it for this alternate scenario. I'd like to remind everyone else once more that these are fake events based on real facts from history. We don't know or cannot know how these events would have played out in the real world, since they never happened, but those are just my opinions, and I'd be curious to hear yours down in the comment section below. If you like this alternate scenario, please take a second to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And maybe consider joining the Empire from Nothing Discord server, where we have a channel dedicated specifically to alternate scenarios, just like this one. For sources, check out my website, linked below. If If you'd like to support future projects, you can do so there as well, or by clicking the join button below, or by becoming a patron. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching as usual, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.